I have borne this dark inheritance since childhood, a silent, insidious curse seared into my soul. My earliest memories blur into hazy fragments of shadowed corners and whispered secrets when a demon found refuge within me. Diffident. I don't know if I named it myself, or whether its dark whisper planted the name in my mind. Diffident rolls off my tongue as a curse. Diffident skulks in every moment, its presence an ever-throbbing weight that anchors me in loneliness and crippling shyness. Most people associate demonic possession with aggressive behavior, or speaking in tongues, or projectile vomit. But not all are like that. Most are small, insidious inhabitants whose innate meanness causes havoc to the host. Diffident scope is to infect me with crushing shyness. For my entire life, I'd been unable to form relationships. Friends, partners, even family can never be close to me. Each time I try to speak to anyone, my demon's influence overtakes me, and my brain turns to mush, my words stumbling over each other. Much to the delight of Diffident, I am cursed to spend my life alone. I have tried to rid myself of its presence. I've consulted therapists and spiritualists, but whenever I try to communicate to them, or put into practice their teachings, I clam up, my head gets woozy, and I am unable to speak. Diffident's hold on me is complete. To any casual observer, I am completely normal, if a little quiet, and this normality is its primary weapon. I cannot explain that I am possessed, or seek help from those in the secular realm who may be able to exercise this being, as I appear to be just another regular person. With my acute shyness, there are not many jobs that I could excel at, but I have found one that suits my introversion. In my town we have a grand library, home to countless books. It sits in an old hall, converted to house tomes of every variety. I love it here, surrounded by a world of knowledge and imagination. I've become the librarian, and it is all I have in the absence of fellow human connections and friendships. The quiet spaces in the nooks and crannies between the bookshelves provide silent relief from my onerous affliction. I occupy my days amid the hushed corridors, a maze of ancient oak shelves with dim golden lights pooling on faded carpets. Every morning I unlock the heavy wooden doors, haunted by memories of isolation and the suffocating grip of Diffident. My work offers escape from an existence starved of intimacy, a place where silent communion with a world of literature tempers my inner desolation. I navigate this sanctuary with measured steps, my gestures small and careful, as if any movement might provoke the demon's mischief. Patrons drift through the library, each seeking solace among narratives and knowledge. I guide them in murmurs, my words tripping over one another under Diffident's oppressive reign. Conversations collapse under the weight of my silence. Every attempt at connection stumbles into an abyss where my tongue twists in vain rebellion. I observe the world with a heavy heart, cursed to wander a realm of muted interactions, every friendship severed before it may bloom. This all changed on the day she walked into my life. It was a Friday, and I'd just finished my lunchtime sandwiches when she came through the door. I'd never seen anyone so beautiful. She moved with such grace, effortlessly, floating over the carpet to my desk as though from a dream. Her long brown hair tumbled over her shoulders in waves that shimmered as the sunlight struck them. Her eyes are blue-grey, full of life and laughter. I'd never seen her before in my library. Immediately, Diffident made his presence felt, reminding me of his dominion. "Hi," she said to me, her eyes shining at her delight in being such a magnificent depository. "I've been searching for such a place. I like to spend my Friday afternoons reading quietly, just to escape the madness of the world for a few hours." My mouth moved, but no words came out, Diffidence grasping hold of my tongue. She continued regardless. "This looks like the perfect place. Are there desks here where I can read?" The only sound I could make was a strangled acknowledgement. I felt the redness flush my face as she smiled back at me. I could see in her eyes her realization of my condition. "That's great. I'm Eleanor, by the way." She looked at me expectantly, awaiting my own introduction. But I couldn't do it. The words would just not come. Embarrassed, I looked away, glancing downwards at the pile of books on my desk, ready to be returned to the shelves. Risking a glance, I spotted the familiar expression of those who attempted and failed to hold a conversation with me, a slight crease of her brow. But for Eleanor, this did not seem to put her off. I sensed the possibility that she too had experienced moments of shyness that she'd managed to overcome, and recognized the mannerisms in me. Nevertheless, she moved on. "I adore the classics," she said. "Preferably Gothic fiction. I've always wanted to read Wuthering Heights. Do you have that?" Of course we did, and I knew exactly where it sat on the shelves. It was one of my favourites. The story of doomed love resonated with me. Without speaking, I emerged from behind my desk and indicated that she should follow me. As she smiled, it kindled my bursting heart. We moved through the ranks of spines that stood sentinel through the library, and I brought her to the section she desired. Between the shelves stood a long window, providing natural light to a reading desk with a worn leather chair. With gentle fingers, I removed the book and placed it in her hand, motioning to the table. She thanked me and took her seat, engrossed immediately. Head bowed, I left her to her blessed solitude. As I walked back to my desk, I could hear the echoing laughter of diffidence in my mind. It knew my thoughts, my feelings, and it knew that it had complete control over me. A couple of hours later, Eleanor emerged back at my desk, and with a nod and a smile, she departed. I couldn't say a word, but as I watched her leave, the familiar loneliness and yearning crept up on me and took root. In the days following, I could not force Eleanor from my mind. Her beauty touched my heart. She had not judged me by my condition, nor shown any discomfort or bemusement in the face of my plight. When, a week later, at the same time on Friday, she walked back through the door, my heart leapt. But her smile and greeting were met by diffidence forcing down the portcullis in my mind. "Hi," she said, breezily as she swept in. If anything, my previous thoughts about her still did not do her justice. She was perfection to me, an angel in human form. And yet, even diffidence hold, her very beauty was a torment. I could not express myself, despite craving to do so. If only I could speak to her, just even the most mundane conversation, about the weather, about the day's events, about her taste in fiction and which books I would recommend, I would consider myself the most fortunate man. But no, head down, mouth closed, no eye contact. Mentioning that she knew the way, she disappeared amongst the shelves, back to her reading spot. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, my hands trembling. I had put up with diffidence curse my whole life, and to this point I'd managed to suffer through it. But no more. I needed to rid myself of it, no matter the cost. And yet, I could almost feel diffidence resolve harden. This is what it was all about. This is what sustained it. The denial of the most basic human condition of being loved made it stronger. Once again, its evil laugh echoed in my mind. What could I do? What method would dislodge such wickedness? I needed to confront my shyness. By doing so, I'd be confronting the demon. If I could not speak, maybe my actions would do the talking. Making myself a cup of tea, I poured a second cup, adding a little milk. Taking the saucer, I headed towards where she was sat. I know from my own experience that no one enjoys being disturbed while engrossed in a novel, not that my demon would allow me to speak to her anyway. So a cup of tea, placed next to her on the table in silence, would at least demonstrate that I appreciated her presence. Diffidence sensed this, and I felt its hesitation. I felt its doubt. Verbal communication was one thing, but acts were another. It was worried. Turning the corner to the alcove, I saw her framed in the light of the window, and I caught my breath. As usual, no words emerged from my mouth, but I took over the tea and placed it on the table next to her, the saucer rattling as I set it down. She smiled. "Thank you so much," she said. I nodded, and even managed a slight smile back to her, much to Diffident's annoyance, a minor triumph over its tyranny. Would this be how I beat it? Eleanor picked up the cup and took a sip. "This place is so wonderful, so peaceful, it feels magical," she said. "I should really tell my husband about it." Her words struck me like a thunderbolt. Husband. As she drank her tea, I noticed the wedding ring on her left hand. I didn't say a word, I just turned around and left. Diffident gloated as I made my way back to my desk, his laughter reaching new heights of mockery. I wanted to bang my head against the counter. Of course she had a husband. She was beautiful. There's no way she would ever be attracted to someone like me, who was not even able to have a simple conversation with her. A couple of hours later, she left, leaving the empty cup on the counter, along with any lingering hope I had. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor became a regular visitor to the library. I could set my watch by her, always turning up on a Friday, spending a couple of hours reading before heading off. I looked forward to her visits despite my pain, a bittersweet time of the week to be in her presence, and I always made her a cup of tea after an hour or so. My natural inclination for kindness came through. Following the revelation of her marriage, I was happy for her, genuinely so. Loneliness, I knew from my own acerbic experience, is not something anyone should feel. She deserved love, and it is not gracious to deny anyone that happiness through one's own selfish devotion. But nevertheless, I found it hard to reconcile why I sensed a certain sorrow in her visitations here. When, one Monday morning, she appeared before my desk, I was taken aback. Monday? This was a break from her usual schedule. I was overjoyed to see her, but I sensed something was off. She still smiled at me when she came in, but those creases etched around her eyes, the firmness of her jaw. She was upset. Not speaking a word, she disappeared to read her books. I left her in peace. Clearly she had come to the library for solitude, to gather her thoughts. But after a couple of hours, her normal time spent here, she did not reappear. I grew more concerned. Making her tea, I navigated the labyrinth of bookshelves, and as I approached her reading spot, I could hear her sobs. They were not loud, just gentle weeping. Through a gap between the books, I could see her as she sat in the glow of the window. In her grief, she did not see me. Her tears glistened like diamonds in the sunlight, and I noticed that her book lay open on the table. Next to it sat her wedding ring, removed. I am no genius, but with her unusual visitation time, the cause of her sorrow lay clear to me in the removal of her ring, a symbol of relinquished love. I wanted, more than anything, to comfort her, to whisper consoling words, for her to allow me to place a kindly arm around her shoulders, a gentle human connection to mend her wounded spirit. But Diffident awoke and made me feel dizzy. I trembled a little as I approached her and laid the tea down on the table. I did not look at her as I did, but I could see from the corner of my eye that she looked up at me hopefully, her tears dotting her cheeks, as though she just wanted me to ask her if she was okay. Diffident locked down my vocal cords, stilled my tongue, and I exited the area as quickly as I entered, much to Eleanor's confusion. Stumbling through the bookshelves with no thought to my direction, I raged. I'd had enough. She needed comfort, a friendly ear. She was in pain, and it would just take a brief show of concern on my part to help. That's all I asked. Towards the back of the library, I headed towards the stockroom where we stored the damaged books and those we cannot fit on the shelves. Bursting through the doors, I gripped the side of my head and shook it in frustration. "Get out!" I screamed, though no sound emerged from my lips. "I've had enough. I want you gone." Just the sound of Diffident's hysterical laughter echoed around my mind. What followed was a strange calmness. The tumult in my brain subsided, but I felt my skin prickle. Here, in this dark stockroom, I felt its presence, no longer inside me, but out of its cage. My anguish fed its power, made it stronger, and now it wanted to torment me further. The atmosphere thickened with dread. Out of the shadows, behind a book pile, it emerged. It wore my face, my grotesque mirror image. Diffident held a wicked smile beneath its black eyes, evil, mean, and parasitic. It approached me, feeling my anger and my hate, and growing stronger at every moment. Terror struck at seeing my alternate self, my doppelganger. The dam burst. I rushed forward, pouring my lifelong frustration into my actions. I grabbed hold of its neck and squeezed. I pressed so hard my fingers hurt, and Diffident sank to its knees, always keeping those jet-black eyes fixed on me, the smile never leaving its face. It didn't struggle, didn't defend itself. It just allowed my fury. I let out a strangled cry as I tried to force the life out of it, but it began to laugh, that old, familiar, sinister sound. I shook now, my grip so tight around its throat, digging the tips of my fingers into the cold flesh. No reaction other than a look of malice and triumph. On some level, I knew my actions fed this thing, my aggression and my anger, making it stronger. But I couldn't help but persist. I began to tire, my fingers burning, and I felt lightheaded. The demon's malignant influence, grown to new heights, it sought back its refuge. Stars wheeled before my eyes. I was going to pass out. For a moment, I was blinded by a flash, and when my vision cleared, I found I had my hands around my own throat. I'd been choking myself. Diffident felt stronger now. It had existed within my mind for most of my life, but my recent anger caused its growth. I could feel it now as an almost physical presence, weighing me down. It seemed latched onto my shoulders like the straps of a heavy backpack. Around the periphery of my vision, a creeping darkness lingered. I'd failed. Diffidence could not be defeated. Exhausted, I left the stockroom and returned to my desk near the entrance. What now for me? What future horror must I endure? I would never be normal, never be able to live a regular life. When Eleanor finally appeared, I felt the great mass of depression descend over me as Diffidence steeled for another awkward encounter. She carried the empty teacup and left it on the desk. I averted my eyes, unable to speak. "Thank you," she said. "I needed that today. I'm sorry if my distress embarrassed you, but this library is my sanctuary, the only place I can come and feel peace and collect my thoughts." I wanted to tell her that she shouldn't be sorry, that the only thing I cared about was her well-being and happiness. I just stared at the empty cup. She caught my glance. "I know you find it hard to say anything," she said softly. "I've been like that most of my life too, an introvert. The only thing that banishes it for a while is the kindness of friends, bringing me out of the shadows. Every time I come here, you make me a cup of tea and leave me to relax and be by myself. That simple act, the simple understanding of me, is worth more than 1,000 words." My heart raced, and for the first time in my life, I looked up and met her gaze. Diffident felt unsure, confused, and the weight on my back began to lighten. Sunlight spilled through the window, bathing Eleanor in a radiant glow, softening the darkest corners of my mind. A halo of gentle brilliance encircled her, its light seeping towards me, and diminishing the demon's strength. A hope kindled within me, a promise of connection. It battled, of course, fought against the forces of compassion and humanity, but it had no answer. You know, in all truth, I'm not much of a tea drinker, she continued, raising an eyebrow. I much prefer coffee. There's a cafe just up the road. Would you like to come and get one with me? The invitation trembled in the air, igniting an inner turmoil that both terrified and liberated me. In that fragile instant came a longing to break free from isolation and embrace the possibility of life. I heard a scream of anguish in my ears. No, you can't. You can't do this to me. You must say no. You must refuse the invitation. With each protest, the word sounded more distant. It was beaten and receding into the depths. Maybe I had not banished it completely, but it became locked away in some dungeon of my mind. Eleanor looked at me, waiting for my reply. I'd love to, I said.